Students, we started this class saying that to talk about cities is to talk about human progress, especially in America where 82 of the population is urban. I am making you watch this podcast because in the 3 years since I started teaching urban economics, the technology has changed dramatically. We don't know if it's going to be a wave or a tsunami. And it's normal to be worried and afraid, especially if you're in college with big uncertainties ahead of you. Still, as you complete this module, I want you to know, well, first, that it's better to know where you're standing. That way you can move accordingly, right? But also, very importantly, every time you've posted a little idea or a picture or given me a period, I consider your humanity, your flesh and bones, and the ideas that no one else can quite have because only you have your own experience, your own life. And you don't need to be a protagonist in this attention economy. You just need to use your econ skills, your common sense, and go on by doing the best you can. You just need to find a way to pay the electric bill. You have to find people who love you truly and love them back. And that's all. We can make better cities and we can make better futures just by holding on to our humanity. Keep up being generous, students. And it's been an honor to be your professor.
I'm a pretty loyal reader of Kyla's newsletter by Kyla Scanlon, which often feels to me like it's being sent back in time from some future economy. And in a way it is. Kyla is very much a member of Gen Z.
Bartcoin has been one of the most stable assets of this entire time, which I think says a lot about this entire time.
And the economy she is reporting on, the economy she is theorizing, an economy where attention drives capital as opposed to capital driving attention. Kyla Scanlon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What is different about the economy that you live in, that you see, that you feel Gen Z is experiencing from the way us 40 and 50-year-olds described or understood the economy?
So one of my pieces that went far was Gen Z and the End of Predictable Progress. And it was based on my research over the past year. I've been traveling on a quasi-book tour, going to a lot of college campuses and going to a lot of conferences. And I've been talking to young people about how they experience the economy and how they think about their future. And so for them, it doesn't feel like there's that quote-unquote path of predictable progress that maybe their parents had or their grandparents had. And of course, every generation has had its own challenges. But for Gen Z, you don't have that predictable return on a college education anymore because of things like AI, because of how expensive college has gotten. You don't necessarily have a path toward buying a house that feels even remotely approachable. And if you think about retirement or just moving through a career path, that also feels really far away. And so that whole piece was well, what does it look like if this path that everybody has followed has kind of disappeared, more or less?
Let me stay on the topic of the feel of it. So then what does it feel like if you can't see your way to a house, if you're not sure what the career paths are, if you're not sure what AI will do? If you had to describe the emotional structure of the conversations you have with people on the tour, what are the dominant emotions?
I think there's a lot of worry. I think everybody picks up on this. There's so many think pieces about, the kids are not all right? There's a lot of nihilism, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety. And you sense that when you talk to people. Because, they don't really know what to do. Because this path that has sort of been instilled in you from the time that you were little, go to college, graduate, buy a house, it's out of reach. And so when you can't get that, it feels far away, right? And so David Brooks was writing about the rejection generation that I think encapsulated it really well, because he was the Gen Zers are facing rejection after rejection. It's hard to get into college, and then when you graduate college, it's hard to get a job. And so I think that element of always being rejected from everything, or at least feeling like you're being rejected from everything, creates those elements of nihilism that show up in how Gen Zers might spend or save or invest.
Tell me about your barbell theory of Gen Z.
Essentially, there's two ways that people seem to be responding to the uncertainty in the economy and the lack of a path of predictable progress. One path is tool belt pragmatism. So people going back to the trades, becoming a plumber, electrician, great. taking a path that isn't as speculative and uncertain as, getting a bunch of debt and going to college. Other people are going a meme coin, gambling, sports betting type of route. And so you have these two ends of the extreme of risk. But both of those are responses to that path of get a college education, get a white collar job, and go off into the sunset, not really working anymore.
How much is this a narrative and how much is it a reality? So if you look at unemployment for Gen Z or new college graduates, recently the unemployment for new college graduates is up a bit, but it's not, 30% or 40%. I've seen people debating the housing question. We're millennials or now Gen Zers. Are they really so far behind other generations on housing? And won't all those houses get passed on anyway? So is this really a problem? So is there a divergence in your view between the data on the economy that people in Gen Z are in and how they feel about it? Or does it match?
I still think there are some elements of a disconnect, right? Like people might be feeling a certain way because of social media that doesn't always match the data. But I think when we look at some data points, like the college wage premium, so basically how much more you make with a college degree than not, and that's eroded over the past couple of years. And so you're graduating with a college degree, very expensive. You're not making as much as you might expect. Housing is still quite expensive. Like eventually those homes will pass on. But I think the median age to buy a house now is like 54 years old. And in the 1980s, I believe it was 34. And so there are some data points that support the fact that there are these elements of nihilism and perhaps reasons for feeling nihilistic that weave into how Gen Z experiences the economy. But I think it's all exacerbated by things like social media for sure. Like there is elements of narrative that might sweep beyond the data, but the data tells the story too.
You also talk about how there's not just one Gen Z. There are multiple.
Yeah.
What are they?
Yes. So I'm an ancient Gen Z.
I'm an elder millennial.
So I graduated right into the pandemic. And so I'm part of the Gen Z ones. So those that were, you remember a time in college where you weren't in Zoom, like you were pre-pandemic, you were in the workforce during the pandemic. And then Gen Z 1.5, it would be where like my little brother is. And so he was in college during the pandemic. And so that shaped both his relationship with institutions and his relationship with digital. And so he got a lot of education via Zoom and he relied on digital tools, as we all did during that time, to forge friendships and to forge connections. And then Gen Z 2.0 is the people that are in college now and high school now. And they're the first part of that generation that is entirely digital. So for them, like that digital seems to be an extension of reality. So Rachel Johns-Faz was the first person that kind of came up with bucketing the Gen Zs. She had Gen Z 1.0 and Gen Z 2.0, and I stuck a Gen Z 1.5 in the middle because I think it deserves a bit more splicing. But that's how you can think of it, is like the relationship with technology and the relationships to institutions.
And the pandemic is such a big player in that, right? To graduate before the pandemic, to be in school during the pandemic. Is the implicit argument here that Gen Z is just going to be a very different generation because it had this shock that other generations didn't, right? That the pandemic hit at a much more formative time for essentially all Gen Zers. And what came before them, what's going to come after them, is going to be less volatile than what they went through.
Yeah, I think so. I think Gen Z is the beta generation, the beta tester generation, rather. So they're the ones who were like, is TikTok good for the brain? We'll see. And, can students do Zoom classes and still get an education? We'll see. Is unfettered access to the internet okay? We'll see. Like, we've tested a lot of things on
smartphones
Gen Z.
in schools.
Right. And we're learning. We're learning. Like, a lot of schools are starting to ban smartphones. But I think Gen Z is the generation that hopefully will take a lot of lessons for Gen Alpha and perhaps not put them through what the Gen Zers have gone through from a digital mental perspective.
How does AI fit into the job market that young people are both seeing and sensing?
So AI is interesting because there's all these stories about how AI is going to replace entry-level jobs, and these companies are going to automate all this work with AI. Like Salesforce, I think, has automated, so they say like 30 to 50% of their works or something like that. And so if you're a young person and you're looking at that, you're like, oh no, like these entry-level jobs that I rely on to, get on the bottom rung of my career ladder are going to be taken away from me. And so I think that also creates an element of fear. It's like, well, where do you even enter the workforce if the entry-level jobs are supposedly all going to be done by AI?
This is where I think the feeling of it is important. When I both feel this a bit myself, but when I talk to people who are starting out more in their careers, my sense of the moment is it's a little bit, for a lot of people, like looking at a wave in the distance. And you turn on the news and they keep telling you have a tsunami warning. And you're like, well, is that wave going to turn into a tsunami? And if so, how quickly? And do I have time to get out? Or am I in a high enough, area? And you don't really know, but that it has become this fog between you and a stable vision of your own future, right? When I started out in journalism, it wasn't clear that I could succeed in journalism, but it was never because there might be a massive technological shock to journalism in which a computer would do my job instead of me.
Right.
And obviously things like that have happened in manufacturing with both, globalization and automation. But I think it's some of that there is just this ambient uncertainty. It feels like that moment of like liquidness, or I think fog is probably the better metaphor, is very present for people.
Yeah, and if you look at the money that the companies are spending, like that can, that's concerning too. When you see like Mark Zuckerberg spending billions of dollars to poach people from OpenAI, it's like, well, clearly something is happening here. Clearly he has some sort of plan. Like, will that plan work? Who knows? Because the metaverse didn't work out, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the overwhelming narrative is that like, oh gosh, well, if you majored in computer science, like you're out of luck, man. Good luck out there. Or if you majored in arts, or if you're trying to be an artist, like too bad, AI is going to do your job. And so I think right now we're at this phase of technology where we're trying to establish the human part of it, and we're not doing a good job at figuring out where humans need to be in the technology equation. And instead we're like, no, we're just gonna automate everything, and sorry, we don't have a plan for people.
This really frightens me, actually, is that if AI was going to hit like COVID hit and just put 50% of the population out of work, we would do something about it. But if it moves slowly and just eats a category and a tranche of jobs at a time, we're going to blame the people who don't have jobs. Mm-hmm. Right? We're going to say, well, most people who graduate with a marketing degree got a job. So you're just not working hard enough. You're not smart enough. You're not one of the good ones, right? We're so used to doing that in this economy, blaming every individual for what happens often when it's, very sectoral, very technological. And I talk to a lot of politicians about this, and they're kind of abstractly worried about it. And none of them have an inkling of a policy answer for it. Like, what do we do if AI, which seems totally plausible, just doubles like 18 to 24-year-old unemployment in the next 6 years, or triples it? Like, what policy would we deploy for that? And nothing.
Yeah. I'm not surprised to hear that. I don't know if anybody has a good answer. Like the common answer you'll hear is UBI, like universal basic income, right? Like we'll just set aside $1,000 a month for everybody, and that'll be that. And I don't think that's the right answer either, because like, to be human is to work and to have meaning and to have purpose. And so if we all of a sudden just say like, no, you don't have meaning and you don't have purpose, like that feels really bad. And so I worry, if we do have a policy response, like the upheaval, the societal upheaval that could happen if all of a sudden we're like no jobs for everybody, could be really bad. And then there's the other side of the coin where there's a good paper that was published in the National Bureau of Economic Research that talks about nails, like hammer and nails, were once, I think, 0.5% of GDP, like in the 1800s, like the nail part. Huh. And so
It's a lot of GDP, actually.
yeah, right. But like that just shows like technology is always shifting and changing and like no longer nails like that big of our economy.
Yeah.
Like we develop new parts of our economy just like we did with the internet. And so that's kind of what we have to hope for, is that new jobs will be established with AI rather than no jobs at all.
Which maybe they will, but it's that disruption period that is very scary, I think. You mentioned UBI. I've been around a lot of UBI discourse. My wife wrote a book on giving people money a couple years back. My old colleague Dylan Matthews, I thought, had a great line on this, which he said that UBI is simultaneously too much and too little of a solution for the AI problem. Because if you imagine you're a unionized truck driver, right, an interstate truck driver, you're making $88,000 a year, and your job is automated by a driverless truck, which we are currently pretty close to being able to do. In fact, maybe already can do it. And then what? And a UBI in a far-fetched scenario where we actually pass one is going to give you $22,000 a year and also going to give me $22,000 a year. So it's not enough of a solution for you. It didn't replace your income or give you your dignity back. And it's too much solution for me. Like, I didn't lose my job.
Yeah.
And the UBI thing always just struck me as a very strange, like, and fanciful response to AI. It might be good for other reasons. But AI is not going to put everybody out of work all at once. AI is going to make workers more productive, which will slow down the hiring of new workers. And that's just it's actually just a much harder problem to solve or to address.
How do you think we should address it?
I have no idea.
So even like in talking to the policymakers, there hasn't been anything floated that, like, is this just something that we're all just going to stare at each other until it's here?
I think that, going to some of your work on attention, you're going to need a focusing event. And we don't know what it will be yet. Where something happens that clicks into place, that this is a problem we need to deal with now, that people are really losing their jobs now. And it's going to depend on how big that event and that trend are. So a lot of people lost their jobs to the movement of factories to China. We didn't really do that much for them.
No.
We just failed to respond to that, and it was very destabilizing over time in our politics. I was talking to somebody who's in this world, and he was a big skeptic that AI was going to take away jobs, even though he was a big believer in AI. And his argument to me was like, look, you're going to have so much capital investment in data centers and all this. We're going to need so many electricians we're going to meet. And it struck me as very fanciful in this idea that we're going to turn all of these comms majors into electricians really quickly. So to me, I just haven't heard a solution that really makes sense. And my worry, it's weird to be hoping for much more disruption rather than less, but I think we would have a much better chance of responding to it well if the disruption is significant enough to be undeniable than if it is slow and a lot of little pieces happening kind of all at once, but nobody can quite prove what it's coming from, right? Like my confidence is higher in an almost emergency scenario of this than it is in the accretion that I think we're likely to get.
Yeah, so you'd rather have a flood than a slow drip.
I think so.
Yeah.
What do you think would work?
I don't know either. That's like the hard part about it. It's so easy to diagnose problems and it's much harder to come up with solutions, it turns out. But I don't know. I mean, I think the physical world element of AI is also interesting too. Like, it does require a significant amount of resources. Like, the data centers are massive and they're quite loud if you're near them. I think we are speedrunning it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a flood rather than a slow drip just based on the amount of money that's going into it.
My version of what I think is going to happen, or one, let's call it plausible scenario for what will happen, is that it's going to be during the next economic downturn when companies need to squeeze their labor forces, that they're going to make a big transition to AI. And so if you imagine the mixture, attentionally, of a recession, which focuses a lot of coverage and interest on the economy, and watching companies do what they've done in past recessions, which is using the recession as a moment to make a technological jump into some higher productivity technology like AI, that I think is going to be the kind of scenario where this becomes a really dominant conversation. And by the way, you could imagine another category of answer to it, right? Which is regulations about how you can and cannot use AI to replace people, and various kinds of protectionism, right? There was a somewhat famous interview from a couple years back between Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro, where Carlson basically says, trucking is one of the most common jobs for men in most states. Oh, I would absolutely outlaw driverless trucks. And Shapiro's like, you would? And Carlson's like, yeah, like, what's wrong with you that you wouldn't? I think debates like that, should we actually welcome this productivity increase or should we stop it, will become much more salient and in a way that people are not yet ready for because they're so used to technology just being adopted as opposed to debated.
Yeah, not all progress is progress.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the rub of it. It's like, because what's also interesting about AI is like, yes, it's being used to replace some jobs, but it's also being used in ways that are spreading misinformation and kind of capturing people. Like people have sent 3 million messages to the AI chicken on Instagram, right? And so you also have to question, like, not
just a hell of a sentence that I don't really understand, to be honest.
Really?
But I mean, I can intuit.
Yeah.
I guess there's a chicken that is AI generated
and
on
you can
Instagram.
Message it and
what it says, like, bok? Like what?
I don't actually know quite how it messages back, but there have been 3 million messages exchanged with the chicken. And there's all sorts of like AI slop videos on TikTok. And that's a big part of it too. Like, you know, being a person, you find meaning within work, but you also find meaning within how you spend your leisure time. And increasingly people spend it scrolling, understandably, right? Like I was on a plane ride yesterday for like 5.5 hours and the woman next to me was very nice, but she was scrolling on TikTok for the entire 5.5 hours. And you can just only imagine how AI will accelerate the addictiveness of stuff like that, as well as, you know, the impact it'll have to the labor force.
You talk about how AI is going to create this abundance of intelligence that will create a scarcity of truth. Tell me about that.
So yeah, I think truth is really valuable. It's the most important commodity of the present moment. And it's something that is increasingly scarce. And once you lose it, it's very difficult to regain it. And so I think AI is going to create a lot of information and a lot of noise, and it'll be increasingly important for people to be able to sort the truth out from that. Because like the AI does hallucinate quite a bit. If you've ever, you know, talked to ChatGPT, it does make stuff up and you can be like, hey, you made that up, and it'll correct itself. But you still have to be able to source it, like what the truth is and what that means. And like, I think that's also the problem with social media too, is like those algorithms are designed and the incentives are perhaps not aligned to the user, they're aligned toward the corporation, right? And so anything that people can get addicted to and there's a monetary incentive for them to get addicted to it, it's going to happen. And so I think there is a world where the AI can be a source of truth, but right now I don't think it is. But people take everything it says at face value. Like the number of @Grok, is this true? That happens on Twitter where people are like asking the AI to validate a tweet rather than go and do the research themselves and like work that muscle in their brain. It's concerning because you do have to have a radar for truth because it's so easy to get taken advantage of right now. There's just so much information, there's so much noise, and it's just nonstop. And it's very easy to make mistakes, and a lot of people will do. And you have to be able to know what's true and what isn't, and have your own like moral and value compass.
Maybe this world where everybody's asking ChatGPT or Grok, is this true, is exactly the thing we've been yearning for.
Maybe. I think it has to get there.
Can't blame me for trying.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of value in the optimism, but I think what you were maybe talking about is sort of like dead internet theory almost, like where there is this intellectual flattening of the public, and then maybe people don't come up with new ideas and they don't challenge themselves, and they don't, like there's, you know, a bunch of articles talking about how the college students are having a tough time because AI is making things a bit too easy. It's a little too frictionless. And I think I worry about that too, like the cognitive effect it could have. Like I notice it in myself. Like if I overuse AI in terms of research, which I do use it.
Mm-hmm.
I notice the lack of sharpening of my own toolkit.
You've written a lot about this world in which it seems to you the social incentive for thinking is being diminished.
Well, I mean, I have to be cautious of broad generalization. So, like, I make videos about the economy, right? So, like,
And newsletters.
and wrote a book, and but
You're multi-platform.
But like, I spend a lot of time on social media, and the reason I make videos on social media is so I can understand the mechanisms. So every day, I like post a video on Instagram or TikTok, and that way I can see how people respond, and I can like sort of get a radar for like how social media is interpreting one side of a conversation. And so then in terms of the social incentive for thinking, I mean, I do worry that social media has created elements of polarization that's been very widely discussed by a lot of people. And I think AI could exacerbate that and make it more challenging for people to go out and seek information. Like there's a lot of value in memorizing things so that way you can like pull forward that fact rather than going and Googling. But, these arguments are also old, right? Like people did say the same stuff about Googling. It's like making people dumb. And so perhaps it's just that same argument rehashed.
So I think AI is also a bridge to this other argument you're making, which is that attention is infrastructure.
Yeah.
And one of the things you write in that is that traditional economic substrates are land, labor, capital, bedrock inputs to make stuff. But now the foundational input is attention. Walk me through that.
Yes. So that's an argument that we used to need things to kind of like raise money or like move through the world. And now increasingly you can just have attention. And the idea is that attention is increasingly becoming an infrastructure of sorts that people have to build upon. So no longer is the economic foundation something like land, which is very physical, labor, a person, capital, actual money. It's attention. And then narrative, so the story that you tell to gain that attention, is the capital that inflates the attention itself. And then increasingly now we have speculation on top of both of those. So speculation is kind of like the operating layer, right? So it operationalizes the attention and makes it move throughout the world because now you can attach actual dollar signs to how much attention you're gathering. So things like prediction markets would be the best example. So Polymarket has a Substack, and they wrote about a man that bet on Mamdani in the mayoral race in New York, and he made like $300,000 off of it. And what he was doing was essentially seeing where attention was going and trying to make inverse bets off that and seeing where the story, the narrative was wrong. And he was able to operationalize that attention going in the wrong direction, the stories being incorrect, through speculation via predictive markets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this is sort of a weird way, it sounds to me, in which I think we think of the attentional economics and revolution as being primarily about digital media. But it sounds to me like the way you're describing it, I think this is true, is it's like the weird bastard child of digital media and financialization of everything. That it's the ability to endlessly bet, right? The venture capitalists are betting,
Yes.
The day traders are betting, the crypto people are betting. In a way, when we just give things our time, we are sort of making a bet about what's important.
Because that's like where, like, so influencers, right? You get money through views. Like that's the monetization of the attention economy, more or less. But now we're able to bet on where attention goes. So like influencer, it's a very box situation. Like you have a video that does 1 million views, you make your money, blah, blah, blah. But people can like bet on how much views your video might get. And so that creates this multi-dimensional aspect to the attention economy.
Well, and creates a feedback loop, too.
Right.
I mean, polling has always had a bit of this quality. But I really watched with Mamdani and Trump the way the betting markets drive now feedback loops, where people see something happening, and then they begin posting more on it. And then the thing begins happening more, and you can see it in the betting market. And so they begin posting more on it or giving more money to it or whatever it might be. And one, it turns attention into capital, right? Because money follows it. And two, it just makes it realer,
Yeah.
right? It is a way of something that's starting small can become exponential just through these feedback loops. Again, if it's sufficiently kind of viral and people keep picking it up.
Yeah. And they do, because you there's when money goes, attention follows. When attention goes, money follows. And so it does create this really quite nice, in terms of structure, not nice in terms of effects, but nice feedback loop that's really interesting to watch. And it was very interesting to watch, what happened with Mamdani and the prediction markets and how that moved him. And increasingly prediction markets, I think it's always kind of been this way, but it's now what people think. Right? They're not betting on what they think. They're betting on what they think other people think. And so they're essentially betting on the attention economy itself and using the stories that people are telling about said attention economy to determine where their money should go. And then more money follows. It's crypto in a sense.
But so you said attention is a foundational input. That's clearly true for a certain set of products. Does your theory of attention as a major infrastructural input, does it say anything about the big parts of the economy that we just don't pay that much attention to, that don't have big narratives around them? Or that's just sort of not part of this theory?
So there's the physical world and there's the digital world. The attention economy really applies to the digital world. There's elements of attention that can serve the physical world. If care workers need a new policy passed around them, the more attention that they can have on things like that, the better, because that's how you get things done, is a bunch of people talking about it. But yes, the attention economy primarily sits within the digital world, and the physical world, for now, is free of it.
Here's a question I have, even when I just try to think about the way attention and speculation matter in the economy. You know the old book, James C. Scott's Seeing Like a State, right? That the state has to make things legible to itself.
Yeah.
The algorithm has to make things legible to itself. And so those of us following along in life through the algorithm will see the things that are legible to the algorithm. Cluely is very legible to the algorithm,
yes,
right? Because it has this high engagement strategy. On the other hand, $15 million from A16Z, it's nothing, right? On the list of AI investments, it's pennies. And most of these companies making a ton of money or raising a ton of money, many of them are in stealth mode because they don't want other people copying them, right? There's a lot happening that is less attentionally salient. But because it's not visible to the algorithm, we can't even really discuss it.
True.
It is very hard to tell when you are overestimating the role of attention in the economy, because the nature of the things that get attention is you can see them more clearly. And there are all these things that don't. Like an economics of attention needs to be able to distinguish when attention is also misleading you. How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's something I've thought a lot about, because I do make videos on social media. And so I can fall into the trap of thinking that that's the entire universe. I think most people who use social media can fall into that trap. But there are a lot of companies outside of the attentional universe that are creating very real things. But I think what's been really interesting about the Trump presidency is that he's expedited the value of attention. And so I think for him, attention is the value creation. It's not the path to value creation. And so he has also established some sort of playbook within politics that people are starting to follow. And so there's always going to be pockets of the attention economy that are outside of the attention economy, right? But I think more and more things are falling within the purview, including politics.
Give me your theory of friction.
So basically, the idea of friction is that there is value in things being a tiny bit difficult. And so when we use digital tools, there really isn't a lot of friction. Dating apps, it makes dating very easy. DoorDash makes things coming to your house very easy. So you can kind of have this frictionless existence. You also have an algorithm that's designed around you. And so you can be served anything within your echo chamber, and you don't ever have to, if you don't want to, kind of think outside of whatever you want to be thinking about. Whereas in the physical world, there's a lot of friction. So if anybody's flown over the summer, it might have been a challenging experience because we don't have enough air traffic controllers. We don't have enough people doing maintenance on the plane. And it's just little things like that feel like they should be simpler, and they feel like they should be running smoother, and they're not, because they're not part of the digital universe that gets so much money and investment. And so it's this idea that there's a bunch of friction in the physical world and perhaps not enough in the digital world.
Do you think those things are connected, that there's become so much friction in the real world of building things and accomplishing things, that it's created this like flight to the digital world, that people are over-invested in the digital world because we have done such a bad job managing friction in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to be online. You don't have to like reckon with stuff unless you want to. And so I think you can create this curated experience. Like my boyfriend talks about it all the time. He's like, you can just have this perfect appearance, and like and people write about this too. Like your Instagram page is your best moments ever. And so you can kind of have this life that isn't your life. Whereas in the physical world, you might just be dealing with like headache after headache. Like, how do I pay this bill? How do I make rent this month? How to make sure I'm still succeeding in my job? All of those things.
So for you, there's a connection between friction and meaning, or frictionlessness and meaninglessness.
Yeah.
How do you draw that?
I mean, I think the idea is that when things are a little too easy, it's tough to find meaning in it. Like if the way I think it might be best to visualize it is WALL-E. So like if you're able to kind of lay back and, watch a screen on your little chair and just have smoothies delivered to you, like it's tough to find meaning within that kind of WALL-E lifestyle, because everything is just a bit too simple. Like the good parts of life often come through the hardest struggles. And I think that is where people do find a lot of meaning. And that's what all the greats, write about, is like the struggle is the path, keep pushing the rock up the hill, more or less. And so I think that's how I think about it, but I don't have data to back that up.
No, but you do have literary analysis, which I've enjoyed. You have a great piece, or I thought it was a great piece, on the Screwtape Letters.
Best book.
Which is, well, why don't you describe what that book is for people who've not heard of it?
Yes. It's one of my favorite books in the whole world. Have you read it?
I have not read it.
Oh, you should. You should really
I
read
will.
it.
Yeah.
It's one of my recommendations for here. But it's this demon called Screwtape, and he's writing these letters to his demon nephew, Wormwood. And it's all about how you demonize this human. So Wormwood has a human within his care, and his whole thing is like to bring him into hell and away from God. And the way that you demonize somebody, like you would think it would make them, you'd kill somebody. Like you would want them to go kill somebody, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's how you would think of it. But it's really just keeping that person stagnant. So all of Screwtape's letters to Wormwood are like, no, just keep him not feeling anything. Keep him in one place. Like don't let him fall in love. Don't let him get passionate. Just keep him baseline, keep him bored. Don't keep him, doing his prayers. Like let him forget all meaning and purpose within his life. And that's when he'll come to us, the demons. And then towards the end, Screwtape gets mad at Wormwood and they eat each other, essentially.
Spoiler.
Yeah. But like it's a good metaphor for kind of how badness moves through the world. Like badness does usually end up eating other forms of badness. Like we kind of, not to call Trump and Musk demons, but like they're infighting now. Like Trump is threatening to deport Musk. And so like not that they're bad actors per se, but like people who are trying to find perhaps bad parts of people are always going to find that in another person, and they turn on each other eventually.
Did you listen to my colleague Russ Douthit's podcast with Peter Thiel?
I have seen clips. I've not listened to the whole thing yet.
So this is Thiel's view of the Antichrist, largely, right? When
sure.
This is sort of his theory of we will be lulled into the Antichrist one world government by the environmentalists promising us peace and safety. And there's something very strange about it. And he's like out there like funding Palantir and surveillance technologies that sure seem to me like what would create a one world dangerous government. But I guess from this, Screwtape letters, like if you're going to imagine that the worst thing for society is stagnation, that the true path away from godliness is a kind of decadence, that there's a connection between those two theories.
Yeah. But I would say, like, the way that C.S. Lewis is writing Screwtape, or at least the way that I interpreted it, was that if you do have people that are, numb to the world around them, it becomes difficult for them to push back. Like if there is, a Palantir takeover or something like that. So I think the two worlds can coexist.
And there's also the sense that there's some kind of corrosive meaninglessness in the society we're building, in the absence of certain kinds of struggles, certain kinds of social structures. I'm not sure we know how to pull those things apart, but like when you said at the beginning of this conversation that the thing you hear a lot is nihilism from young people. And the thing in a way that AI feels to me like it pushes is nihilism, right? Is a kind of sense of like, well, if this can do so much of my work for me, like what am I exactly? Like I don't think any of us know how to put this on a chart, but it certainly feels to me like people are acting from a sense of its truth.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that you can feel when you talk to people. Like there is this element of fear and worry. And, one thing about the US is we don't really have a social safety net. And so like if you do fall because of AI, it's how do you climb your way back up? Who knows? And so I think people are trying to find truth and meaning while having, this technology that's incredibly hypnotic and will get more so hypnotic with things like AI that also might take your job. And so it's a bunch of forces all at once that is perhaps a bit too much for humans. Like we really haven't evolved that much since we were hunter-gatherers. And now we're being tasked with like in this hotel I stayed in New York, they had all these headlines on the wall from the New York Times, and it was like
great paper.
But it was people are looking for Amelia Earhart, and basically everything from like 1912 to now. Like they had just these headlines in this picture. But and I was looking at that, and it was like the saddest headlines ever, and I was like, I feel like I see all of those headlines just in one day now, and it's like that was like 100 years of headlines, and I feel like I see all of that just in a day. And that's a lot for the human brain to process, considering we haven't really kept up evolutionarily.
There's something in this. You often make the argument that everything feels like crypto now. and that feels relevant somehow here, where crypto has this quality of so much energy and hustle and money and attention all circling a kind of nothing at the core. Particularly as I think the more idealistic dreams of what it could do have faded, and now it's just pretty clearly a vehicle for speculation. And there's this way in which I think a lot of things are developing a little bit of that quality. Like politics sometimes develops that quality, like it does really matter, but there is this kind of nihilism people can sense in it that I think is really depressing, right? It really, really depresses people. And the economy, right? If you feel like you've put in all this work in your education and your learning, and now the deal you're promised isn't really there, and we're inventing a computer program that can write your essays and do your learning and produce the kinds of things we are asking you to produce better than you can. So you're still running really fast. You're still trying to get grades. You're still, trying to achieve the thing. But what is at the core of that, right? If it becomes a little bit less obvious. Mm-hmm. And I think hollowness is something people sense really well and is very, very, very dangerous.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think... So I used to work in crypto and was like once very excited about it, and I was like, this thing's going to be cool and we're going to have alternatives, and it has increasingly become just purely a speculative asset, and there is that element of hollowness in it. Like, I know a lot of people still work in crypto and they're like working on very cool projects and there's a lot of optimism sometimes. But you do see a lot of people in this space being like, well, what is behind all? Like, what's behind the screen door or the curtain? And I think that sort of speculative hollowness, as you've pointed out, does show up in how people are trying to navigate their lives. Because it's like, what is next? What does this mean? And I think part of it is this like broken ladder problem, right? So like you graduate from college, do you get a job? 23% of Harvard MBAs were unemployed 3 months after graduation. Those are the cream of the crop, right? If they can't find jobs, like that might be tough for you. And you're like, you just see all this data and you're like, oh no, housing, career progression because people are taking longer and longer to retire. And so I think all of those points can create that feeling of hollowness. Like, what is it all for?
I have this sense that we are undergoing a kind of correction where interest and attention are moving back into things that are just more difficult and more real.
Yeah.
Like, I would not have thought I would publish a book on like zoning reform and the policies under which we can build transmission lines, and it would become like a big national bestseller and throw off endless discourse. And, we're talking the day after Gavin Newsom signed a bill, really, really changing the California Environmental Quality Act, right? So things are happening. There's so much energy around even just a conversation about how do we do things in the real world, right? It was pent up, right? It's not my book that did this. It's that people wanted there to be attention on this, and the book was a focusing event. And even like with my thing with abundance, I've noticed like the discourse that you would find if like the only place you followed it is people screaming at each other on X, like it's a very polarized discourse with like aggressive defenders and, aggressive critics. Whereas then in like the world, as I watch it actually filter through, it's like I find moderates picking up parts of it. I find leftists like Zohran Mamdani picking up parts of it. I find Gavin Newsom doing parts. It's just everything is much more complex than the simulacra. Somehow you need to fuse the dynamics of the attention economy and the real economy, or the dynamics of performative politics and real politics. So eventually, the next Democratic or maybe even non-Democratic president will be better at managing both performative policymaking and spectacle, which obviously Joe Biden was not even in the game on, with strategies to actually try to get things done, right? Which he was better on. I think that, attention has become like more like capital, and you need to know how to raise it.
Right.
But just like with capital, to succeed in the long run, you also need to know how to spend it.
Yeah.
And I think right now there's a lot more sophistication in the raising of attention than the spending of attention.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be it's like a societal learning we're all going through together, and not painlessly. But I wonder if like pretty impressive things can't lie on the other side of it, right? If we could get some politicians who understood both sides of it, more business leaders who understood both sides of it. The thing I'll say about OpenAI and Sam Altman, as I said a few minutes ago, and it's true for Elon Musk too. Sam Altman, very, very good with attention, but OpenAI keeps releasing impressive products. Elon Musk, very good with attention, but SpaceX keeps doing impressive things in space. That there is this way in which like the future belongs not to the influencers, but to the influencers who can deliver. Mm-hmm. It's maybe not enough to deliver without being an influencer, but it's also not enough to be an influencer without being able to deliver. I think that's my optimistic take.
Yeah. I mean, I think attention is a precursor to power rather than a byproduct now. So it's like, as you're saying, like, the more attention that you can raise, like narrative is a form of capital, mimetic storytelling is really useful. And then that way you can like build all of that around yourself. And then it makes getting into power a bit easier. the way that I think about it is there's extractive speculation and then there's strategic speculation. So extractive would be like, Trump kind of dragging people from one thing to the next, or, Cluley's marketing campaign, just sort of like dragging people along, and then they end up somewhere where they're like, where am I? But strategic would be, like your book, which got a lot of attention, got a lot of discourse, reaching Gavin Newsom, right? And like that was a really good use of the attention economy. I don't think it was intentional on Ural's part, but it was incredible, like the amount of discourse. And then now you've changed policy, which is the ultimate goal, right?
I don't want to take too much credit for this. It was hopefully helpful, but
he said
a lot
directly,
of people.
Shout out to Ezra.
Fair, but a lot of people working on this for a long time before
Of course, but you know what I'm saying. But you get what I'm saying,
yeah?
Right? Like there has to be as you're saying, like there has to be an end goal, but you can still use the framework of the attention economy to get people to that end goal, and that's what has to happen. Like the bones are still important, and I think they're not going away for a bit. But the question will be, where do they go from here? And you have to be able to send them somewhere.
And then always our final question. What are 3 books you'd recommend to the audience?
Yes. So I really like C.S. Lewis. And so I'd recommend The Screwtape Letters. And then I'd also recommend A Grief Observed, which is by him also. It's like a really nice read on grief, because grief can feel very lonely when you're going through it. Like if you've ever gone through a loss, it's devastating, and you feel like you're the only person that's kind of experienced something so big and heavy, and people are telling you it's going to be fine, and you're like, no, it's not. And he just writes in a way that makes you realize you're not alone in that. And my last book recommendation is Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach, which is about this seagull that, everyone's like, you're never going to be able to fly that far. You're never going to be able to do all of this. And he just takes it upon himself to fly. And I won't ruin the ending, but it's this really nice read on the power of people taking a chance, but then what happens when we forget why we took that chance in the first place.
Kyla Scanlon, thank you very much.
Thank you.